Welcome back to the SimGeeks podcast. We are your hosts, William Belk and David Shablock. This is going to be fantastic. We are joined by the one, the only, David Halliwell, who is the co-founder of LifeCast Bodies. So if you don't know what that is, please Google it. They are the insanely realistic mannequins, basically, that have been around for a few years now. I'll let David tell his story, but we're going to jump into this. Shablock and I actually sat down with you last year in Los Angeles, and it was at the Second Skin launch party. We kind of sat off in the corner away from the rest of the crowd, avoiding everybody else, and had the most wonderful conversation for a good hour, maybe hour and a half. And afterwards, we both said, holy shit, we should have recorded every minute of that.
Yes.
What you are seeing now is basically a tribute to a conversation that we had a year ago, but we'll see how this plays out. So tell us, your background, who you are, where you came from, and how you ended up where you're at now.
So I'm Dave. I started, I suppose, my adult journey in the British military in the 80s and trained as a combat medic. Met my wife in the Falkland Islands and then I decided that military life wasn't really for me. That's the nicest way to put what happened. So I moved into the ambulance service and worked my way up and became head of education for an ambulance service in the UK with about 3,000 staff that I looked after. And I suppose in that 30-year journey, just got fascinated really by simulation, how I could get more out of my learners. I did a master's degree in training rather than education because I felt it was all about vocational work, and so started to pick apart really understanding skills and how to develop skills and how to make better paramedics, and that was the start of the journey. At the same time, the world was changing. I suppose that's, again, another story, but the world was changing and getting a little bit more violent, and things happened on a global scale, such as 9/11 and, a lot of those things that really transformed our world, And obviously for those of us that were suddenly in senior command ranks, we suddenly had to start and focus on things like terrorism and mass casualties and managing bleeding patients in very different ways. So a lot of my early military training actually came back in and was quite useful in the latter years. 2012, probably my career highlight really as a paramedic. I was one of the strategic commanders for the Olympic sailing events, so Gold Command. And we spent sort of 6 years training up to that point. And then from 2012 onwards, I'd had enough of the health service and I thought, where's my career going to go? And I was lucky enough to be headhunted to go out and work in the Middle East and start preparing the ground really for the World Cup in Qatar, which has happened this year. So I had 12 months away from my family living in the Middle East, and Rob, my business partner at LifeCast, came over. We were doing some training for Special Forces guys over there, and we sat there one day in the desert and said, you know what, we can do something very special with the skills that we've got and the knowledge that we've got. And so we started our journey, which ended up as LifeCast, and we started LifeCast 6 years ago. So it's been a fascinating journey. I mean, truly fascinating. I'm just lucky to still be alive, really. So I'm glad you can remember a conversation from a year ago.
So my first time hands-on with the LifeCast body was actually the first day that I met Pete with Echo, Pete Ford.
Fantastic.
And so it would have been about 4 years ago. But at that point, I'd already been watching you guys, from afar, seeing it online. You post a lot on LinkedIn and some of the other social media websites were showing a lot of the work that you're doing. At what point did you make that decision of, there's a lot of great mannequins out there, but they're all how do we create something that's hyper realistic to get that emotional response? What was the thought process that went into that?
Do you know, I've been educating people for about 20 years, and every time they came up with the same words. It's not like this in the real world. Mm-hmm. I can't relate to plastic. It's not, this isn't like a real person. And I thought, okay, there must be another answer. And so we reached out to a guy called John Schoonerad. John had worked on Saving Private Ryan, Gladiator, Mission Impossible, Kingsman, all of those. He made all the bodies.
Small movies nobody's heard of.
No, little movies that people don't really know. And I reached out to him via email and I said, I understand you're based in Elstree Movie Studios and you make bodies. I said, I've made a body. We sort of created my own monster. Can we bring it up and show you? So he said, yeah, and I sent him a photograph. And the wording in a photograph, I think, am I allowed to swear?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
The wording that I got back was, it's shit. That was it. And we didn't hear from John for a little while. About a month later, he said, come and see me, bring your monster with you. And so we took it up, and he basically took a knife to it, cut it apart, and said, it's rubbish. We looked at what he was able to build, and it was like, do you know what? This is the answer. This is the answer. This man and his team are the answer to our prayers. And so we started really just copying people. So, they've got some very special skills. They 3D scanning people, obviously live casting people. John developed the concept of live casting. So he'd been live casting for just over 30 years. And again, we're based in the home of Star Wars. So John's background goes way back to some of the really early Star Wars stuff. So, we're just incredibly privileged, really, to work with some of the best artists in the world, sculptors in the world. They work at Madame Tussauds, and then they'll come to ours, and, or we'll send them on to Madame Tussauds, or they'll go off and do a movie for a couple of months, and then they'll come back. And we see ourselves as sort of the home for all these freelance guys to say, yeah, come and work with us, So it's really exciting. We don't lose that many people, which is good news. A lot of them will still return, even if they've been away for a year, they'll still come back because we've got that sort of family attitude, I suppose.
That speaks very, very highly. I mean, turnover is, when I did management and retail, that was the indicator.
It's all about that. It's all about the culture that you create. But, I see some of the stuff they've done, and you may have seen it, that we've got... There's a program on Disney Channel called Bringing Up Baby, I think it's called. And in that you've got elephants and you've got tigers, and they're all in the womb, and then they grow and they grow and they grow. And so, for a period of time, our factory was full of elephants at different stages, being sculpted, and, seals and all sorts of things. I mean, it's a completely crazy place to work, but actually brilliant for my mind,
Oh, yeah. Inspiring.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so... There was a story you were talking about last time, and what Will didn't tell you was we were just happened to be looking over, Echo Healthcare's Second Skin and all that, and you walked in and drug us to a table and then just blew our minds with a million different stories. I will say the first time I ever heard you speak was at SimGeeks Miami.
Good.
And I know that 3 or 4 people, we were sitting in the back and we were just mouth dropped and then talked about you the rest of the time. You are a very, very good presenter. I think for our industry, I've coined you as you're the Steve Jobs of our industry because we love hearing you. So we're gonna rehash a story. Tell us a story about, and I'm going to, the details are not going to be good enough, and I'm not going to cue you well enough, but the Middle East, you're having to train 2 factions of people that just want to see the destruction of the other people. Give us the background of that.
Okay, so around about 2015, I think, 2016, Rob and I were doing a little bit of work with the World Health Organization. We had a friend of ours called Stuart, and we get a message to say, guys, do you want to come out and do some training? We're used to going to parts of the Middle East to train. I'd lived out there. We'd spent a lot of time in different parts like Yemen and, some really not pleasant places. And so we got this call, and it was, do you want to come over to Beirut? And we'd been to Beirut a couple of times before. Everyone knew us. We'd worked for the Red Cross. We'd worked for the Agency for Swiss Development, who put a lot of money into that region. And so they said, look, do you want to come over and do some training? And we said, well, how much are you willing to pay us? And they said, quite a lot of money. And I should have probably twigged there was something wrong at that point, but I didn't, because I just loved doing things. So we head over to Beirut, we get picked up, and we get taken down to a place called Tyr, Tyr, which is on the Palestine border, so southern Lebanon. Beautiful, beautiful place, lots of history, going back to Roman times, and it's absolutely fantastic. So the idea was we were going to run a gold command cell, we were going to use an immersive classroom, there were lots of things that we were going to do, and we basically spent the week designing a one-day event. So we didn't really know who the players were, we didn't really know the geography, all of that stuff we were told we'd be told when we were out there.
To be determined, don't worry about that.
Yeah, to be determined, yeah. Exactly.
Nothing to be concerned with.
No, not at all. So day one, we went and looked at the geography, and it was really interesting because when there'd been an Israeli event where Israel had come into to Lebanon, certain houses had been built, and those houses were built without planning permission, and so there was there were whole blocks of flats that were built in this area. And the area just happened to be on the way to the hospital. So we were like, okay, that's useful to know. And we basically just spent time learning the geography, really. Then in the afternoon, we went and met the first few players, and they were the Red Cross, and they were the military, and they were the local mayor. That was a great day. And then we went and we started being introduced to a couple of groups. They would be described here in America as terrorist organizations. I think that's the word that you'd use. And we spent time with them, looked at their training, looked at their funding, looked at what they do. And what they do is they deliver healthcare to their community. So to their religion, they have their own ambulances that serve that community in this part of Lebanon. And they're not viewed as terrorists, obviously, in their own country. It's more down religious lines. So anyway, we chose to do a natural disaster, rather than anything that could have gone too political. And so we set them an earthquake. And it starts off by them sitting in an immersive classroom, and we make the earthquake happen around the guys, and so that blew their minds because they'd not been in one before. The walls shaked and everything went a little bit crazy for them for a little while, and then they realised there'd been an earthquake. And then we started the feeds coming in, and so the first feed was that the block of flats that I spoke about, both of them fell to the ground, and we had some movie guys who were able to help us source clips of the real buildings falling down. They look very, very similar. And so we showed the guys where they were on the map. That stopped anybody going to hospital, and it gave them the first 200-300 casualties. And we carried on really just layering up. So the next thing that happened, I think, was a petrol station caught fire, and then the smoke from the petrol station could have gone one of two ways. If it went the usual way from the sea up into the mountains, then it would really not do a lot of damage. But if it blew the other way, it would fill up a Palestinian camp with 50,000 people in it. So that was a bit of a challenge for them.
And you said, now how many different groups of people were there?
There were eight players.
And they all got along, right?
No.
That was. So I was going to say, I wanted to make sure people heard that point of it.
Yeah. So the two groups, and I'm not going to name them on this, but the two groups had both tried to kill each other previously, and there's a lot of bad blood. So I'm sitting on an opposite side of the table to you, Dave, and if you can imagine, all of my people would be behind you, and they're all armed, and all of your people would be behind me, and I'm armed, and that's how they set the room up. They chose to set the room up that way, but when you're the guy actually controlling this, it's not the most pleasant of experiences.
Yeah, so that's the interesting part, is that you had to do this not for a group of people that are all going to work together.
Oh, no.
It's actually the antithesis. It is, you need to have this simulation and make them work together when that is the last thing they want to.
There was money attached.
Well, of course.
So the one reason for them working together was so that these funding organisations would carry on putting money in. And so there was like a playbook, if you like, that we will all work together to achieve this aim, and we will do it for this one day while this crazy English guy and his friend are in the room. And we had loads of observers from World Health and all these other organisations. But yeah, it was crazy. I think I've spoken on other podcasts about there was a part of the sim that I'm not overly proud of, where I went and when we were designing it, I thought, well, how can I personalise this? How can I really get some messages to hit home? And I was talking to the guys about where they lived, so I made sure that their houses disappeared and that their offices disappeared and all their infrastructure disappeared. But then I sort of made the mistake of making it too personal, and I actually got a chap's daughter to record her. I recorded her voice saying, "Daddy, I'm at the beach and the tide's gone out and I've got loads of fish for tea." And she just phones him up when at the point of the tsunami. She phones him up, and he genuinely, because he hasn't seen outside for the last 8 hours.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is this was an unfolding event for hours.
Event for hours. I mean, we were there for eight hours of sim, But, at one point I took it down a quite dark path, which I'm not proud about, because then the guy thinks he's not seen daylight. He thinks his daughter is at the beach, is caught up in this tsunami. And I never really got the chance to say sorry, never really got the chance to debrief the guy in the way that you would want to. And that's why I tell the story now, because, there are days in your life when you just do something where you think that was a bit of a dick. I was a dick there.
Yeah.
That was the wrong thing to do. I used the be a dick, don't be a dick. Which button do I push today, or push the wrong button there?
Yeah.
I think.
Learn from our mistakes.
Learn
They
from our
happen.
mistakes. Yeah. I still beat myself up. So actually, even 6, 7, 8 years later, I'm still beating myself up about that one day. So he's won. I mean, there's no doubt in that. I'm sure it was a 10-minute thing for him. For me, it was a career moment where I thought, that was a bad thing to do.
But you made it through, and now we all get to benefit from your
sure.
unfortunate experience.
Sure. I mean, we've done work all over the world, but that particular sim was probably one of the best ones in terms of who it was, where it was. The players got a lot out of it. And obviously, I presume most people know, but 3 years ago there was an explosion in Beirut, the fertilizer explosion, and it made 30,000 people homeless. And the fire chief who was in the sim with us, he lost 13 people in the first second of that explosion because they were trying to put out the fire, and so they were basically just destroyed. And we got messages from him and his team to say, Mr. David, thank you. And it was one of the proudest things I can ever hear. He said, when we were going through it, we just felt like it was one of your sims. And it's just like, okay, well, then I've achieved what I needed to achieve.
Mission accomplished at that point. Yeah, absolutely. And
absolutely.
I remember that. I didn't think about it until you said it, but I remember seeing the aerial photos from that. It was just devastating.
You can watch the video over and over and over. But most people don't realise that there were people killed that were actually standing there trying to put out the fire. It's part of the story that isn't told. The bits that are told is the devastation to the local area. A lot of the sims, we take out things like hospitals. We take out all your infrastructure on those mass casualty sims. And again, that's exactly what happened to them. The explosion took out the local hospital. It overwhelmed the local hospital, and they're setting up field hospitals and everything else. But they've been trained for it. I mean, that's what my job was, to make sure they could do it.
Why we do this.
Yeah, absolutely. I like major incident sim. I'm getting too old now for going on these adventures to dangerous places. I'm a grandfather now, so I've got to be more responsible. That's what everyone tells me.
Well, I always thought I had an interesting career, and then I sit down and talk to you, and I'm like, oh man, there's so much stuff I never even touched on out there.
No, I just trip into these things. It's not by design. I wish it was. People talk about portfolio careers, and it's like that wasn't what happened. It's just somebody says, do you want to come and see this? And I'm like, yeah, okay, I'll go see it. What is it?
Just can't look away. You're just drawn to the light.
Just drawn to it every time. Every time.
Well, I mean, this is one of those things. We had that meeting last year, had a great conversation, enjoyed a lot of this. It's always fun to talk to you, man. Every time I see you, I get excited to come chat with you. And of course, we're always so busy at these events. I'm glad we got to iron out a time and come join you.
Yeah.
What advice do you have? I mean, there's a lot of people like us. All three of us here all started as paramedics and kind of transitioned to simulation. You took a much different route than the two of us did. Even David and I took drastically different routes. What's your advice to somebody who's looking at making that transition, jumping in, coming from an EMS background and wants to be involved more in education and simulation?
I think the EMS background is for me as a sim guy is probably one of the best, because we have to be able to deal with anybody from any age. So from 22 weeks now, the minimum age of viability, up to 110 years of age, with any medical condition or traumatic condition or whatever condition, anywhere. And no other specialty has to do all of that stuff. Nobody else has that, that scope of practice. I think a lot of the work that we do that's different than anybody else is all environmental. How does the environment shape our behaviour? And we know it does. If I was to put us outside in the cold, you're probably not going to do your skills as well as if you're in a lovely warm environment. So, a lot of things that I've played with over the years have been, well, how does heat affect me? How does smell affect me? And, or how does smell affect my learners, more importantly? But, I've had the privilege of just working with some really crazy people who say, do you know what? Actually, there are a lot of things that affect how our learners learn. And I'll give you a really good example. I worked with a guy, and he was monitoring the levels of CO2 in a standard classroom. So I was shit at school. I was really rubbish at school for lots of reasons. But I'm going to blame carbon dioxide because what happened was you put 30 people in a room, you lock the doors, you close the windows, the CO2 goes up. As the CO2 goes up, their brains start to shrink in terms of all the blood vessels and everything else, as we know happens when you get too much CO2 in a room. And then obviously the ability to learn goes down. And this guy had developed this little tool that measured CO2 levels in a classroom and actually was able to show that it wasn't bad teaching necessarily, but actually it was stuff like ventilation and having, opening the windows actually stopped the CO2 levels from going up. And just to have that conversation with somebody is a mind-blowing thing, because you think, my God, my entire classroom, my entire life, every classroom was too small, windows weren't open, door was shut, and there we were breathing out all this CO2 for, 2-hour lessons. Well, no wonder none of us could concentrate,
And we wonder why schools are ground zero for every outbreak, right, of every event.
Absolutely,
Kids come home sick every other week with something.
And it's all these little things that we don't think about until we think about it.
And the same guy was measuring light levels. He had a little, light level monitor and looked at daylight effects and so many things. And I just love being around people who say, do you know what, actually, have you thought about this or have you thought about that? And I think, if I was to say anything to anyone wanting to jump into our world of simulation, I think the most important thing is spend a bit of time and just think about, what it is. What are you trying to achieve? I've seen some amazing educators who use nothing more than, a Lego brick, a Lego person, and they can make you cry because your Lego person's about to die because they're such great educators. And I think those are the guys that, we want to emulate. I think, unfortunately, in our world, there's a lot of lazy people, and I was one of those, where you only know one company and you only know one mannequin. And I used to spend £400,000-500,000 a year for my tutors. I had 26 tutors to equip them with the kit. They'd break it every year, and then I'd spend the same amount of money. And I only ever spent it with one company for my entire career because I didn't know that there were others. And I think coming to something like this, where you can see so many different vendors and talk to people and say, oh, that's really cool. Does it do X and Y and Z? I hate the fidelity conversations. They still drive me insane. I've still had a lot of those here at this event. Oh, is it high fidelity? I don't know. You tell me. And they're like, oh, you can see the buzzer going off in their brain. It's like, who is this guy? Why is he asking me? Surely it's an obvious thing. And I'd say, if you're asking me about technology, it's low technology. But if you're asking me how close to real it is, it's pretty bloody close.
Take a look at it. Yeah,
exactly.
Unfortunately, I'm one of those that I have to fight that battle because in the air medical world, our accreditation requires dynamic simulators, which is their way of saying high fidelity in the technological stance, right? So as much as I love the LifeCast, until I can put some electronics to it and make its chest rise and fall, I cannot use it for accreditation scenarios. So that's something that we've had to fight for a few years now, which I've gone back and forth with you guys and Echo on that for a long time.
Work in progress.
Oh, yeah, it's coming.
Push the ball forward. So one thing that I've been enjoying is you have a passion project currently. And can you give our listeners, because I've been trying to participate in that, a lot of people have, and it's a great group project and things that you've been prosing to everybody. So give us the short end of the story on that.
The short end. Okay, so I teach at Brighton Medical School only a couple of times a year. And I was sitting there thinking, right, I'm getting older now. I'm due to retire in a few years, maybe.
You're not allowed.
No, but that's sort of my thing. So I did a mind map, just of my own thing, to say, okay, what does simulation mean to me? And I just sat there and doodled it out. And then I thought, I'll just post it on LinkedIn. And then suddenly all these people came through and they're like, can I have a copy? Can I have a copy? Can I have a copy? It's like, yeah, of course you can. I mean, it's just dumping what was in my head. It was just rubbish. And then I thought, well, hang on a minute. Why don't I do a post about every single strand of the mind map? So, and we started off with environmental stuff, and then we went a step further, and then we started looking at the mannequins themselves. And I'm just working my way through it. So every time I haven't got anything else to say, then I'll go back to the mind map and I'll say, right, today we're going to talk. I think we spoke recently about leads and connecting them to mannequins, and and again, just having people like yourself, Dave, who are saying, well, this is how I make my leads. This is amazing. And the more of us that can share that stuff, I think the project will probably be 2 or 3 years long by the time I actually finish, dumping all the rubbish that I've got in my head. But it's such a collaborative thing, because you come on and say, have you seen this video? And Alex in the UK, he posts
Alex
crazy things that he's up to, and and it's just mind blowing, because suddenly everyone's chipping in saying, well, I've got this resource, or I've got that resource. It was never set out to be anything more than me doing one post. And then people were like, oh, could I have a bit of that information? It's like, yeah, okay. So that's really, what it's mushroomed into is about 3 years worth of posts with one theme, which is to try and unpick all of the stuff around simulation,
And I love how you repost the map and then, bring everybody back to the table of the map and then say, okay, this is what we've accomplished and this is where we're going to go from here now.
Yeah, and we built some really crazy projects. I think I showed the rollover car that we built out of plexiglass, so that we could see the students managing somebody who was upside down in a car, and so many of those sort of early concepts. We built the fold-away ambulance, and again, sharing those ideas with people, I think is another great thing.
Locally around me, there were some guys that built the same sort of thing for a car.
Yep.
And what's really neat about it is it's built in 2 sections that unbolt, so you can go through a doorway.
Brilliant. Perfect.
And you come in, it's easier to transport. You can in most vehicles you can transport it without like a truck or something like that, but it can go through doorways and then be reassembled and be the full dimensions of a car.
Fantastic.
Oh, it's great.
That's what we did with our ambulance, the fold-away ambulance. It's just display boards, but then people were like, well, could I have a emergency bed space, bay? Yeah, of course you can. You can print it to be whatever you want. And that, we were on the stand with the guys from Immersive, Dave and Chris, and we were lucky enough to be at the starting point of their journey when they had a gazebo way back in 2013. It was a gazebo with his mum's sheets, and he was projecting from the floor on the outside of the gazebo. It wasn't like we see now.
Yeah.
And again, standing in that for the first time, I will always remember that experience.
Yep.
Always remember it. I mean, now I'm focused on the little girl with Down syndrome.
Yes.
Doing a lot of work with Gwen now and her family. And again, I think I'm trying to represent those people that can't talk for themselves, or those communities that don't get any representation. So it's either the tiny babies, nobody's really championing their cause very well, or it's people with disabilities. The guys at Echo did a transgendered mannequin.
Nice.
I've done a couple of those now. So again, that's nice to see, and I think it's a great thing to be exploring all of these things that are happening in the world through simulation. It's really one of the most exciting times we could ever have. I want to do a child with sort of fused in his wheelchair, so cerebral palsy or something like that. Because again, I was talking to some of my friends, EMS educators, and I'm like, and they said, well, but when they go to sleep, they just relax, don't they? And I'm like, no, they're fused, mate. They don't suddenly become not fused.
Yeah.
When they go into cardiac arrest, they don't suddenly become floppy. They're still fused.
Exactly.
And I think we don't get taught that stuff. We don't get taught how to manage these children in that situation. What would I do? How would I resuscitate it? How would I cannulate them even? So, there's so many things that as educators, we've never really gone there. The Gwen one, I'll just tell you.
She's beautiful.
So Gwen's mum, Cora, is worried every single day when she sends her daughter out, because everybody, every EMS, every doctor is trained on a normal child. And I mean normal in terms of the mannequin.
Correct.
And so they all head tilt and chin lift. Well, if you do that with somebody with Down syndrome, some of the kids with Down syndrome, they have a C1, C2 axial issue. That means that if you did head tilt and chin lift, you could actually pinch their spinal cord, so you could do them a lot of damage. And so that's why that mannequin is so important, because I want every EMS guy, when he sees somebody with Downs, to say, okay, I need to manage this slightly different. Yeah. And the problem, if you try and do that with a normal looking mannequin and say, but for Downs, you have to do it differently, there's no point of reference. So the most important thing for me about Gwen is that I need everyone to have that conversation, so that these kids are not having their necks snapped. It sounds stupid, but it's so important.
It's not. It's very important, and knowing the different types of things. I in my first Sim Center, we did an LVAD case.
Right, yeah.
And so we had a Sim Man Classic, and then we did all of the LVAD stuff.
Brilliant.
And it's interesting because we did it with physicians, we did it with EMS, and a lot of the things that we are used to looking for and doing. All right, you have a person altered mental status or barely minimally responsive, we're going to check a pulse. Not with an LVAD, you're not.
Yeah.
Okay, put a pulse ox on them. Not with an LVAD. And just knowing those different things of, what do I do?
Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic.
When I was coming up as a paramedic student, we had one mannequin, right? And it was a white guy. And that was it. That was our female, that was our child, that was our adult. And it's still, I'll call it out, the entire industry still has a problem with that, where the majority of what we're seeing are white and male, right?
Yeah.
And it's getting better the last few years. We've seen it. I mean, look, even from this booth right now, I can see several mannequins that are people of color. You guys have been leading the way on that since the very beginning, right?
Yeah.
With mannequins that are of advanced age or different races. You mentioned the transgender mannequin. Where do we go from here? How do we ensure that we continue to push that forward so that everybody's represented? Because right now, like it's a thing. We're focused on it. It's very important, but we're still seeing just more white male mannequins than anything else.
I think the great news, Will, is that the others are watching. So, 5 years ago when we started with Vivian, she was really the only older lady, And now I see them on Ladle stand, and I see them on Gomard stand, I see them on the NASCO stand. So people are starting, they're starting to understand. Somebody's got to go first. I don't know why it's always us, but somebody has to go first in this world and say, right. And I think, I hope that, in 5 years' time, we'll see Downs everywhere. I truly hope that. There's some members of the audience here who've got children with Down syndrome who've come up to me, during the conference and said, my daughter's got Down syndrome. There's a delegate here. And she has Down syndrome, and she came over and spoke to us yesterday. And I just think, it's so fantastic. But there must be so many other communities that are just not represented or just not spoken about. I laugh, but we used to pierce our mannequins, because again, most hospital clinicians have never taken out a Prince Albert, or they don't really know what one's all about.
Yeah.
So I quite often put them into the mannequin so that people can have that experience of taking them out, because it's only silicone.
Yeah.
And so again, when I'm feeling mischievous, I'll send out a Vivian with nipples pierced, and she'll arrive somewhere, and there she is with both nipples pierced, and it's like, come on, then what's the problem? Like, it's her choice, and that's what that's the bit that everybody seems to be missing is. All of those bits of mischief, as I call them. But
and we very much think of these old ladies as being, old and innocent, and they don't have us. But in all reality, like I spent a lot of time in the cadaver lab, and you wouldn't believe the number of cadavers we have with implants. Because we're getting older too, right?
Yeah.
Things that were kind of emerging when we were young are now being done by 70 and 80-year-old people because they had it done 30 years ago in the 90s when it was cool. But think about that. It was 30 years ago, right?
Vivian herself, she hates the phrase geriatric.
Yeah,
she hates the phrase elderly. Yet we have elderly care wards in the UK. You guys have a whole geriatric community, thing. Everything's called Jerry over here, and it's just so wrong. Vivian is, Vivian's an actress. She's in The Crown at the moment. She's been in Star Wars. She's done all these things, and she's very much alive. And and again, I'm in awe of Vivian, really. Pete, the older man that we make, Pete himself, pre-COVID, he was swimming 3 times a day, and he's got defined lat muscles and everything. But unfortunately, because of COVID, he stopped swimming, and so the change in his body is he started to become a little bit of a wizened old man. And so again, the really exciting part is we're going to try and capture Pete now and have a pre-COVID and a post-COVID Pete. Just for my own, my own brain to say, look at the damage that COVID did. How fantastic is that,
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that, it's not a new concept to model a mannequin after a real person.
No.
But one of the things that I like, and I see you post this stuff on LinkedIn, is you guys keep the story with your simulator long after we've done it. Because, Andy, the kid from CAE that they used for 15 or 20 years, was somebody's kid in the factory. But you only get that if you go to the actual factory and you take the tour, you get that story.
Yeah.
Whereas you guys are continuing to push these out. And you mentioned like Vivian's an actress. I remember texting David about this a while back. One of my favorite acting credits she has is, you know where I'm going with this, don't you? Yep,
yeah.
the Human Centipede movies.
Yeah.
She was in that.
She's the mother in that, isn't she?
So the minute I saw that, I was like, oh my God, that makes sense now, which is hilarious. I'm embarrassed that I actually watched that movie, but it's you just can't look away. It's such a nightmare. But these are real people, and they continue to be involved with you and your team, and you guys continue to promote them not only from a sales point on the simulator, but also saying, like you just said, as they continue to develop, you can continue to advance that mannequin.
And Vivian herself she works with teams of nurses. So one of the teams that I love are based down in Plymouth, and they do some work where their elderly care module is based around Vivian. What would Vivian want? And they get to the point where Vivian dies at the end. So, if you can imagine that you spent like 6 weeks, nursing this lady, and eventually she gets to the point of dying, and they have the death and they lay out the body and all that other stuff. And then what they do on the final day is they actually have a call with the real Vivian, so that the students don't think, oh, I've killed that old lady off. But actually they get a talk from the real Vivian, where Vivian comes in and says, right, okay, how are you all? And this is my life story. And I just think, whew, thank gosh,
Yep.
because again, it's amazing what people do. Absolutely amazing. I love our world, and I think I keep quoting, but we are the mavericks, we are the crazies, and there's nothing wrong with that. Somebody has to go first. I absolutely love what you guys do, because you're sharing information, and I believe in this whole foam concept. We should be sharing everything we do. It's very difficult when you've got the big boys that hold on to all the information that they've got, and that can make life very difficult for a lot of us. But we're very much about sharing as much as we can. We get people up. When you guys eventually get to the UK, you've got to come. We'll take you around the Star Wars stuff, and you can see how we do every part of it. Most of it you'll know better than I do. I'm sure. But it's it's a great opportunity and a bit of fun. Yes. Normally for people,
we've been pretty open. There's a lot of competition in the industry, and in my industry too, right?
Yeah.
In aeromedical, there's a lot of competition, but I am a firm believer that if something we're doing has the ability to impact patient safety and patient outcomes, we absolutely should not keep that to ourselves, and that needs to be shared.
Yeah.
And whether that's with a direct, financial competitor, another company, if it's affecting patients' lives, we should make that freely available to everyone. And that's my approach to most things simulation, which is how we got started doing this.
And we're the same. I mean, we view it in the same way. Nothing is off limits in terms of people coming and seeing how we do it. We've had most of the big boys wandering around. And again, we're quite willing to share pretty much everything with them. I had Jon Ledel over on the stand this week, videoing for his team, because again, I want him to understand what Gwen's all about, and so rather than surreptitiously doing it, it's like, let me walk you through, let me show you what it's all about. I think that's really important,
Well, David, again, man, this is awesome. I'm really happy we got to catch you again this year. We were a little worried that our schedules weren't going to work out. And of course, we can always do this remotely, but the 7-hour time difference makes it a little tricky.
I'm there anytime you need me. Just let me know. It's a pleasure to be with you guys. I say there's so much I learn from you, and I think that's the way it should be.
Well, we appreciate that. Any parting thoughts for any of the listeners out there, either about your products or about your vision going forward? What do you think?
Oh, I've gone blank in my head. That's not good, is it? I think my vision is, I'll keep sharing for the next few years. As I said, I'm a grandfather now, and I'm starting to reevaluate certain things. And I think the really important part for us as a team is, to listen to the community about, what next. I think I've shared with you probably the direction of travel really for us is to try and pick up some of these other disabled communities or differently abled communities. I've enjoyed the work that's been done around the trans. I think it's fascinating, and I hope that will start to make a difference over the next few years where people have more open conversations about that. I'm not saying I understand all of that myself, and again, being a male in my, white male in my 50s, all of my biases and everything else, I've got to unpick those every day. And I really enjoy talking about where all my biases come from, and when I surround myself, when I look around my colleagues, they're all almost the same age as me. They're all almost the same skin color as me. They're almost all the same sexuality that I am. We almost listen to all the same music. Oh my God, they're all mini-me's, which is just awful. They wouldn't like to think of themselves quite as crazy as I am. But it's fascinating how we build these communities around ourselves. And I think it's just things like LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, they allow you to explore some of these other areas.
That's the first place you and I started talking.
Absolutely.
Was you messaged me and just started asking questions, and you were starting to talk about some of the projects you were working on. You're like, okay, this is what I can tell you, and how would you do this, and this is how we met.
And like Paul Savage in the UK,
yes.
He's doing a lot of fascinating work, and again, I know you and he
Paul.
Collaborate very well. Yeah. So it's amazing. But thank you, thanks for inviting me on. It's a pleasure as always to catch up with you guys.
Well, we hope to have you back another time, please,
okay,
if you don't mind.
All right, take care.
So for the SimGeeks podcast, my name is David Shoblock.
And I am William Belk.
We appreciate you listening. Thank you. Good night.